All right, so today we're going to be talking about mapping the 15-minute city and using OSM, OpenStreetMap, to do it. Launching the presentation. Okay. So today we're going to talk about a couple things, and unfortunately I'm going to talk about those things in terms of a bunch of rhetorical questions, which, yeah, it was the easiest way to do it. So first we're going to talk about what is the 15-minute city, what is OpenStreetMap or OSM, how does one access OSM data, and how does one define 15 minutes, and how do you visualize the 15-minute city? So without further ado, let's get started with that. Who's hungry? Um, so, um, I don't know if you guys are familiar with walk score. I pasted a link in the No Mic voice chat about it. But walk score is like this semi-arbitrary measure of walkability within a just I guess a general area. It could be a neighborhood, a city, a county, state. And the score is defined based on a lot of different parameters. And at one point, those parameters were publicly available, and it was easy to, sort of peruse them. But there was no way to tell what the weights were. So that's why I say it's a little arbitrary. But I digress. A good walk score is high, and a bad walk score is low. So relatively high is around like the 88, 87 range. You see cities like New York and San Francisco. And relatively low, you see these losers over here, such as the city of Jacksonville and Chesapeake, Fayetteville, Winston-Salem, a lot of places in North Carolina. No offense, but uh, that is the walk score in a nutshell. At least for U.S. cities, I think it's a global thing. So, why am I talking about walk scores? Well, in order to understand accessibility and this concept of a 15-minute city, we need to talk about, how do you even go about measuring accessibility in the first place? And so I ask the question, who's hungry? Because access to resources is what one of the central components that defines accessibility. So who's hungry? Where are the grocery stores? Where are the restaurants, retail centers? Where is everything? And is it far or is it hard to get to? That's the question, and that's what we're trying to measure when we talk about the 15-minute city. So what is the 15-minute city? More rhetorical questions. I'm not sorry. Um, the 15-minute city is defined, and this is a definition I ripped straight from the Congress of New Urbanism, CNU. 15-minute city may be defined as an ideal geography where most human needs and many desires are located within a travel distance of 15 minutes. Who's hungry? So this is actually a map of the 15-minute city in Paris. I I am still not sure what the heck they're trying to visualize here, but it's a neat graphic. And it sort of, I guess it shows the center of the city of Paris and a simple buffer going out. I think the standard is like a quarter mile and then like a half mile or 2 miles for bike. Um, and so you can sort of see that buffer from the center of the city there. And so ideally, if you have a 15-minute city, you'll have all the resources you need within that buffer. But it's really not that simple. So because we're so in love with Lord of the Rings in this Discord channel or server, I thought that I would lead with this graphic here. One does not simply draw a quarter-mile buffer around a point and call the area accessible. It's a lot more complicated than that, and I would really, that's part of what we're going to be looking into, right? Whether or not something is accessible and how do you even go about measuring that in the first place. Moving on. So I pasted a link in the No Mic voice chat, and it's app.developer.here.com /15-minute city map. If you guys want to just take a moment, and I'm going to give you a little bit of time to click on that link and interact with that application. I want you to play around with it and just maybe take a moment to tell me what you see. Is the place that you searched accessible? And ideally that place would be, somewhere where you live or you're connected to, and what your thoughts are on that. And feel free to unmute yourself whenever you want. I've got a timer.
That was the Get Your Walk score?
No, not Get Your Walk score. That's the 15-minute city app. It's the last link pasted in No Mic voice chat. Does anybody want to tell me what they see? Anything strange? Anything interesting? If not, no judgment. So the map that we actually have up on the screen here is a map of the central, it's like the center of Cambridge. So what they do is they draw a buffer out using a tool that we're going to be talking about. It's like defining isochrones. And they also use like a source, like some API or whatever source they use for points of interest. And so the points of interest that they define we'll actually talk about in just a minute. But the way that you define points of interest are actually going to become sort of part of this discussion or part of this talk. So I was hoping that we could, you know, get some like personal insights, some personal anecdotes before launching into the next slide. But it is fine. I don't judge. Okay, so evaluation methodology. How do we define the 15 minutes fee? Well, let's start with, let's use OSM. So we had a geo talk maybe 2 months ago or so. Not a geo talk, excuse me, Mappy Hour 2 months ago, where there was somebody from a points of interest provider. People who I think they use cell phone data to aggregate points of interest. Really interesting. So these there are a lot of different sources for points of interest data. One of them is actually OpenStreetMap, believe it or not. And so their API you can actually easily reference and pull that data straight from the API and feed it into one of your own static maps. Or you can launch your own little application, get some interactivity going there too. So that's really interesting. What you want to do is you would retrieve the geometry that you need. So that would be maybe just some points showing the locations of grocery stores. What do you call it? Not shopping centers, retail centers. Parks, government buildings, whatever it is that you decide to define as a point of interest. Again, we'll get into that in a minute. And then you'll want to convert it to a shapefile. Once it's converted to a shapefile, because the output from the tool that we're going to talk about is actually a, I think it's GeoJSON, which is, it doesn't play nicely with every mapping software that you use. Like, I know that you can bring it in straight from QGIS, but I think you have to do some weird stuff to bring it in Esri's enterprise software, so like ArcMap or ArcGIS Pro. And then you can run calculate service area, I think that's what it's called, or generate service area. Or you can use some of the other options out there. So I mean, QGIS has a bunch of them. We'll go into that in a minute. And then you would generate the map. So again, I said you have multiple options here, right? You can do something static, which I'll show you a visual at the end of this presentation, or you can deploy your own application using whatever API makes you happy. So that, if you recall, so this application here is sort of the visualization that I was describing. But this could probably be deployed on a smaller scale and with a higher degree of accuracy, provided you went and you validated the points of interest yourself, or you conducted some sort of survey, brought on a consultant to do it. And so you can imagine what a powerful public outreach tool this could be. And so this is the tool that I personally like to use for pulling out points of interest data, specifically from OpenStreetMap. It's called Overpass Turbo. It basically just lets you write simple queries or complex queries to and then download the data from your query. It's it works with the Overpass API, which is like I guess the designated API for accessing OpenStreetMap data. And you can access both of those using these two links here. I think I plopped one of them in the No Mic voice chat, but the second link is actually probably the most invaluable resource there is. Um, what this is it's the list of the features and the tags associated with the features. So I'm going to take a quick moment to open this up and show you what it looks like, because it's really helpful when you're trying to build a good query, particularly when you're trying to define your points of interest. So just opening up here. Scott, are you playing this out loud in the other room? Okay, so we're having some weird audio stuff going on here. So, all right, so this is that page I just described. It's the map features, and it provides pretty decent definitions for all of the features here. So when you enter in your query into Overpass Turbo, you would use these terms as the inputs for your queries. So if you wanted, and this is the weirdest one, the library, weirdest one so far, amenities. And then you can put in a wild card and pull out all the amenities, or you could do amenities library. And what that'll give you is apparently it'll tell you where the library is in Guantanamo Bay. I thought that was just a weird tidbit of information I should share with you guys. So going back to this presentation, I digress. Let's practice building a query. So there's this wonderful feature in Overpass Turbo that allows you to basically generate your own queries, but without having prior or detailed knowledge of that map features wiki I just shared with you. So if you click on the wizard here, and let's say you just wanted grocery stores, oh, excuse me, before I do any of that, let's go to Lisbon. So first you want to navigate to the area you want to query. So the extent of this map is actually the query area. Then you want to click on the wizard tool, and you can type in anything you want, like grocery stores. Not anything you want. You should probably do some research on your map features before you enter it in, but a reasonable thing to enter in would be like, okay, where are the grocery stores, where are the libraries, where are the parks. So these sorts of terms, the queries really just build themselves. Query. And then wait for it to process, because I'm sure there are a lot of grocery stores in Lisbon. And so all of these points can actually be exported, saved, exported, and you can select the type of data that you save, right? So it's got some great functionality. It's got some great data, and the data that is available is not just points, right? It's also got building footprints. It has roads. It has waterways. It has trails. It has paths. It has practically any weird iteration of what I just described available to you. So I highly recommend you check it out. So you can just download it or copy it, because GeoJSON is really, it's like an XML file format looking thing. So there we go. That's how you build and run a query. And moving along. So we talked about OpenStreetMap and how to build queries and like what is the value of points of interest data, very broadly. But we didn't talk about what constitutes points of interest. So in this example, I'm actually going to be looking at only a couple. And these points of interest were ripped straight from that mapping application that I described to you. But that question of what points of interest are is actually something that needs to be thought of thoroughly in the context that you're trying to in whatever context you're trying to measure accessibility in, prior to building any queries. I do not recommend just building the stuff willy-nilly without thinking first about what constitutes accessibility in your study area. That's irresponsible. So in this instance, we were trying to replicate this the query output from that mapping application. So we used groceries, medical, culture, education, transit, and leisure as the criteria, the selection criteria. And within that, there are actually much more detailed query specifications, which I really should not share, from the OpenStreetMaps Overpass API. So what was done was essentially we defined these larger categories, and then we looked at, okay, what are the corresponding features, what are the corresponding tags that would need to be set into Overpass Turbo in order to draw out the correct geometry or points of interest that correspond to it. And then it required a little bit of processing on the back end, where we merged some of the geometry into a single shape file, and then we recategorized things, or we had to adjust the isochrones analysis in order to account for existing conditions that we were already aware of and whatnot. So there was a lot of additional work that went into the generation of the map that I'm about to show you. But the selection criteria, I cannot stress enough, is going to be what makes or breaks your study of accessibility within an area. If you're in, it's a garbage in, garbage out thing, and I could rant about it forever, and I'm sure I will if there are any questions after this presentation. So I will reiterate, you cannot just simply draw a quarter-mile buffer around a point and call the area within it accessible. And that brings me to this next point, right? How do we go about generating these isochrones? So there are two ways to do it. There's one way which is a little bit backwards, which is the first way I tried to do it, which was you take a region and you divvy it up into equal-sized cells, and then you aggregate the points of interest. Excuse me. You run the isochrones analysis on the centroid of every single point within that grid, and you assign the cell a score based on the number of resources that are located within the cell, which is a horrible generalization. But how else are you going to measure this? And so it might be worthwhile to subset your data if you're interested in, again, it's really important. You got to define your selection criteria before you do the study, because otherwise you're going to be spinning in circles. So you run the isochrones analysis on the individual centroids, and then you aggregate within the individual cells, and that's one methodology, right? Then there's the other one, which makes a lot more sense, which is you get your points of interest data and you run the isochrones analysis on the points of interest. And that works a lot better, believe it or not. Primarily because the tools that you use to run isochrones analysis tend to be freemium. Which means you have a limited number of queries, and if you divvied up a city or a town or a state, God forbid, into these tiny cells, you're probably going to be running a lot of iterations of the same analysis and getting relatively the same results. So I recommend the latter methodology as opposed to the former. All right, and so worth mentioning, this is an example of the isochrones analysis output. You may recognize it in any maps that you've seen of walk sheds or bike sheds. That's exactly what it is. It's isochrones equals like equidistant from a central point. So it's not just a buffer. it's more than that. It looks at the travel time along a route, and that has its own set of input data, and it all depends on what the it depends it depends on whatever API or what have you that you're using to it's like the basis for your analysis. So it varies based on the tool that you use. If you use an open, and we can go over that in just a second, but yeah, this is the output for one project that I am actually working on. This is the Town of Wellesley Sustainable Mobility Plan. This is based on OpenStreetMap's points of interest data, um, and it is uh, basically just the isochrone analysis overlaid with the excuse me, it's the isochrones analysis, and then it's like all merged into one, and then like the based on the weight, like the number of points within an area, it's like lighter or darker. So you can sort of see that from the legend there, and the legend's probably better at describing what this is than I am. And that's pretty much it. So that's it for my presentation. I hope I kept it relatively short. I left a good amount of time for questions. If anybody has any. Oh, geez, people actually did come to this call. Well, lay it on me if you have any questions, and thank you so much for coming by.
That was excellent, just like the first one.
Oh
I
my
do have a
God.
question because so this topic actually has come up recently in an agricultural discussion group that I joined to try to learn about um, ag tech and precision farming. And this topic of food deserts came up, and it sounds like this method or this methodology that you're using um, could really help kind of map out. And even though like sometimes it's really easy to know, well, okay, here's North Carolina and here's South Carolina, and between that's a really big range. But I'm just saying, if you can map out some of these places where there's this lack of and just lack of like these food sources or points of interest, I think it could be really beneficial to improve infrastructure. Because I asked someone who lived in, they were in Oklahoma City, and there's this, you have an urban area which might have really nice grocery stores, but on the other side of town, there's nothing. And so mapping out these points, I think it's really interesting. I really enjoyed it. And so I guess my question is, if do you think that this is something that could help kind of facilitate, that problem of improving these food deserts? Maybe that's a broad question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, so you sort of brought up two issues, right? Like where do people not have access to food? Three issues actually. Where do people not have access to food? Where is there no connectivity between, so like let's say two points are close together, but there's no connecting roadway between them. Like, can you really call it accessible in that case? So like how well do we account for missing data? And is there some way to use this methodology to like figure out where the gaps are in addition to where the resources are? And I think the answer is yes to both of those questions. I don't think that it's something that, like, so for specifically what we did for the town of Wellesley, like I don't think it'll necessarily like solve all of the problems. And I brought this up during the presentation, right? Validation is like it's 99% of the battle. If the information that we have that's being inputted into these maps or into the analysis, into the isochrones analysis tool, like whatever that may be, because there are like a million of them, um, is garbage, then you're going to have a garbage idea of what sort of conditions are existing within, the study areas. I'm actually going to, I'm pasting out another link in the No Mic voice chat, which is to the USDA's ERS, like food desert map situation. I'm not the biggest fan of it because I think it aggregates everything by like census blocks. It doesn't really go into like travel times or anything like that. But it's something. It's definitely something. So if you were interested in some measure of access to food in any municipal region in the United States, that is a go-to for a lot of federal and state agencies when it comes to grant allocation for those sorts of efforts. Um, yeah.
Thanks. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Oh, I at my last municipality, we actually had this conversation of like, do we have any food deserts or not in the city? And the question was like, it depends on how poor you are.
Hmm.
For those without access to reliable transportation, right? If you can't walk to the grocery store, or if you're not allowed to use the grocery cart outside of the premise of the store, like then getting your groceries is uh, confoundingly harder than if you had a car, or if you only have a car after 10 p.m., right? Where are the 24-hour grocery stores? And so I was wondering kind of like what your thoughts were on that, because we ran into those questions, and the amount of work that it took to answer them just kind of sunk the project into the ground. And so I just love that you actually did something to completion. So I'm just gonna put myself on mute now.
So actually the first talk that I gave was actually about this often unmeasured level or source of lack of access, right? Which is affordability. Um, but I mean, in addition to that, there are those other factors you mentioned, right? Like, okay, well, not just affordability, but also your general income level, your ability to take transportation or obtain transportation. And by the way, transit stops are a component of this analysis. So being able to get to a transit station, which would in turn allow you to access a myriad of other resources, is something that falls with it counts as like as like a an accessibility point of interest. So if there's a transit stop in an area, then it is considered to be something that contributes to it a particular area being counted as the 15-minute city area. So with regard to that the first issue though, with being able to what do you call it? Being able to afford resources. I looked at the city of Baltimore, and I took Yelp price index data. You could also use Google price index data um, to create a relative score for all of the restaurants and businesses and whatever in the areas. And I factor that in to an analysis of accessibility and like potential for as accessibility being the basis for gentrification in an area. So it is definitely something that it requires a little bit of like know-how and like how do you pull data out of an API, or like how do you what do you call it? How do you write a web scraper? But that being able to do that creates like an entirely new world of access to information. And I've seen the same thing happen in the municipality I used to work for, right? Projects die because there isn't staff capacity or funding for a particular initiative, or the consultant on hand just doesn't specialize in this sort of thing, and it's incredibly unfortunate. But good news for you, uh, once you do know how to do it, it suddenly there are a lot of free ways to go about doing it. So money becomes less of an object, excluding staff hours allocation. So I'm really sorry to hear that, but there are some options out there for measuring these sorts of things. I don't know. Did I answer your question or did I just rant?
No, no, that was good. You know, like we ended up getting bogged down in the minutia of like what is the average stride length of an adult and what is like what's a reasonable amount of weight that a person could carry from their home to the grocery store. Like really arcane stuff. And after seeing your presentation, I think that we really kind of missed the mark on that.
I think that in the near future it might be, and I don't know anything about the municipality that you were with, but because the 15-minute city is becoming a more and more attractive term or concept in the field of planning, it might become more acceptable to do general analysis like this, and have it used as a basis for policy making or improvements or even just general insights about conditions within a a specific area or municipality. So um, it I think it might just be like at the time it was proposed, it wasn't ripe, and now that it has, now that the concept has been like simmering, and people have been thinking about it and writing papers about it, it's become more accepted. And this is only within like the last year or so that I think we're seeing this. Maybe there may still be hope, but you never know. It all depends on what the community's like and what the planning department is like as well. So the planning department, elected officials, God, you name it. It's a lot of factors. Um, don't give up.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I think that we thrive on buzzwords in local government, and I think now that we have the 15-minute city, that we have the fuel that we need.
Yeah, and that kills me too. Having to oversimplify these really complex concepts. Like people throw around this term 15-minute city as though it's something concrete, but it's really just entirely dependent on the area. But if you come to them with like, something simple, if you give them something ready made, then it's as easy as following a template. So I would keep an eye out, because we're going to be putting out uh, this what do you call it? The sustainable mobility plan for the town of Wellesley, probably by the end of this year. I don't want to overcommit, but I just want to let you know. So that might be a model document that you may be able to bring before, your superiors or whoever. It, uh, it might inspire them to, you know, pick it up again. Or if
Great,
you're
thank
in
you so
charge,
much.
by all means.
Oh, our my new municipality is super affluent, but somewhat removed from the core of the metroplex. So the big buzz that we're talking about are like drone mobility and how do we get, how do we fly to the airport so we don't have to go through the congested highways and stuff. So it's a different, same but different, I guess.
Got to get that remote ID up and running.
That's crazy.
That's another problem in itself with the drones, but we don't have to go down that rabbit hole
I
if
see
no one
somebody
wants
called Know
to.
My Drone.
Oh,
Sorry about that. Yeah, I find this really interesting. I'm sorry I missed the presentation altogether, but the talk itself afterwards is really insightful. I do a lot of work in Atlanta, especially on gentrification and along the Beltline, and I find it interesting, this concept of a 15-minute city. It's all sort of new to me.
Yeah, Atlanta's form of development is super well. Their pattern of development is really, it's common, I guess, but it's really odd. And I mean, the city is just, most of the people I know who live in Atlanta live outside of Atlanta. Um, and the inside of Atlanta itself is just, it's constrained in its growth by those roadways on the exterior. So like I can imagine that there is some nasty displacement going on within.
Yeah, I'm almost calling it reverse suburbia is what's going on in Atlanta.
That's so. So what? If you don't mind me asking, what specifically are you up to in that area?
Well, I'm working on my PhD dissertation, and what I'm looking at is environmental justice.
Yeah.
So I've been doing it on a 3-year study looking at housing development and how green spaces affect housing in areas of development.
You mean like the relative property value increases, or something more along the social line of things?
It's kind of a combination of both the social, the development, and the community level. I'm doing like a Lucis model to look at all of those factors together.
Hmm. That sounds like well, so my thesis, because I'm not yet at the PhD level, but my thesis was on brownfield redevelopment in Miami-Dade County and modeling the impacts of those sorts of redevelopment projects on property values in the surrounding area. So that's definitely of interest to me. So when you do put out that dissertation, I'd love to read it. That sounds really interesting.
Yeah, certainly. I'd like to get a little more involved in this server, so I really would love to share and hear what you guys are doing too, just to be part of the community.